Hello everyone, welcome back to NPTEL online course on research methodology for planning and architectural studies. Today we'll be discussing a very important aspect of our research design, that is identifying the source of data. So in previous few lectures we have discussed in detail that about the sample size for the primary data collection and also discussed about the sampling techniques. So hope you have gone through all those presentation and you understood it clearly that where to apply what particular sampling technique. But at the same time, many cases, maybe our research needs some of the information which are readily available in different sources in terms of past research papers, it may be some kind of government documents, it may be some sort of website. So to get a clear understanding about different type of information and also their sources, so I have prepared this particular lecture for you that titled Sources of Data. This is lecture number 24. What we'll learn from this lecture, essentially the sources of data, different sources that are available, then secondary sources of data, primary sources of data, and also we'll summarize it. So let us discuss one by one. Sources of data to study the household size of a city. So definitely in this particular case, I assume that the study is on the household. Now for that, you need certain information about their occupation, about their age, about the gender classification, about maybe the child population. So there might be different kind of purpose of your survey. See, if you want to do some kind of development plan for a particular city or in a study area, in such cases you want to capture those kind of information, that what are the facilities at household level they are getting. So for such kind of cases you need some information. Where do we get this kind of data? You can refer the official data from the census of India. That is something, still in our context we believe that that is something the authenticate data, and we can get the maximum information related to the population over there, about their literacy rate. Even after the census is done, the survey is done, they publish some sort of statistics. There are certain kind of ability of district census handbook, but you get more information about it, the total population, working population, male, female population, 0 to 6 years, then the literacy rate, and etc etc. Or it is also available with the municipal corporation. You can also select a sample household and collect the data on the number of resident in each household. So suppose somewhere you don't have the census data, or maybe the data which is available is outdated, you don't have any recent data based upon you can project something for the future. As because we do not have the recent census data available publicly, what's already we are 2024, so almost like we are lagging behind to get that particular information available, and many a times for planners, researcher and all, it's difficult. Now if you consider the data, the information that is available for population, that is 2011, for almost it has coverage for all cities and different parts of India. Even for the rural area at the gram panchayat level you also have the information. But suppose you want to do some sort of assessment on what could be the possible population and other thing in a particular study area, you need to rely on this, which is almost now 13 years old data. There are lot many changes happened, there are certain improvement happened, there are certain kind of development happened, and the population is something which is also one kind of dynamics that is happening, because it may happen that some of the areas, because of the development, because of the employment opportunity, there is a huge growth in population. Somewhere in some part of the country maybe due to lack of infrastructure, people are going away from that particular area. So to get updated information is required. So for such cases, many a times you also need to rely on sample survey. So whenever you go for sample survey, then again you have to select some representative sample. Depending on certain handbook and all, there are certain mention of 1% to 2% of the total household in a particular study area you need to pick to make it representative. So maybe whether you consider this comprehensive mobility plan or maybe development plan, so there are certain kind of instruction and thumb rule that 20% of the household you need to keep. So household means it is the census house, and each household you will have number of person. So that is the household, you can say that the size. So household size in India, maybe you can get certain average of 4, or somewhere like in some of the cities where it is very dense, you may get the number as high as 5, or maybe somewhere it is as low as 2.5, etc., etc. So with that, let us discuss the secondary sources of the information. For the first case, where we need to rely on the government sources, which is obviously you collect the information from an agency that has previously conducted a survey. So for them, they have done the survey. So definitely this is something to understand what is secondary and what is primary. For census, to me, if I take it from the website, it is a secondary information for me because I have not done any primary survey. But the agency, like in this case the government, were looking at that particular survey, that census survey. So for such kind of cases, like it is a very thorough and detailed survey of each and every population of India. So that was primary to them but secondary to me. So that's why here I would like to mention that the case of first one, where you get the information from government website or other agency, that we collect the data from the agency, but that has previously conducted a study which is much more or primary in nature. Therefore, it is not the data collected by us for our study. Though we say this secondary data collection, but that is not like that way we conduct the survey. It means that it is not the primary purpose that the data intended to cover. So that means in this case, maybe for my research purpose, we don't need any primary data to be looked at. It is all on the secondary information which is available, the data set available, or maybe a company sales data is available to you, and then you just do some sort of calculation and look at the pattern. So depending on the research need, you can definitely decide on it. Therefore, such data collected not directly from the respondent from our study is not primary, rather it is secondary information. Now, sources of those kind of information, secondary data, census data, mostly the population and socio-economic data, you can get maximum out of census information. Many countries, they may have a mid census in between each 5 years, and maybe in such cases, even in India, we have the National Sample Survey Organization. So in such cases, they also publish some kind of sample survey which is also authentic. So you can also use it for certain purpose. It can be something which is from the government reports, because that's why I'm saying that in some government reports, suppose they are coming up with certain new proposal or new development in some area, they also do some sort of survey. It may be primary survey, okay, but maybe it is not the entire population is captured like census, but it is a representative sample that they have collected and they use it and publish it. So you can also refer to those kind of government reports. Existing research, we cannot ignore this, because suppose somebody has already done a detailed data collection and also like that particular study also reported that information, not the analysis, also the data. that what data they refer to. So out of that, based on that, means one can interpret the thing and all, but definitely in all such cases other ethical issue will come into picture, that for using the same database that the researcher they published and all, so there will be some sort of kind of approval, that ethical approval and the permission that is required to use. If nowadays there are certain kind of data brief, that is something you may also come across, that many journals they ask that okay, you can also supplement your paper with the data which will be of say open access, and then the other researcher can use it for their research purpose, but definitely there are certain kind of acknowledgement, citation, etc. will come into picture. The other data is something which is the remote sensing data, where we just look at some kind of special changes in a city and all, where you don't need to go for a primary data collection on field, but from secondary information. In this case it is how it is secondary, again those kind of satellite images and other thing that is being captured by some satellite, and it is available through different kind of medium. So maybe you can refer Google Earth, you can refer our own Bhuvan, or maybe it is something like other website as well, where you have those kind of satellite images and you can do certain sort of analysis. So in all such cases we don't actually require the other information that to be collected through primary survey. Primary sources of data, this is the next category. For the second case where we don't have the information, or the information available is not authentic or it is outdated, in such case you have to collect the data directly from the respondent for your study. It focuses solely on the data pertinent to our study and is very specific, that in that case if you rely on the census data, there are huge amount of information. Maybe only I need the child population data, I have to extract it. But when you go for primary survey, you are not going to collect the information which will not be required for your survey. So that is another key point as researcher we should understand, that many a times we get influenced by other questionnaire, somebody publish some questionnaire and all, and we also prepare in similar line. Probably some of the informations are not even required for our study. We don't require that information for our own research. So it's better not to collect that information, because each responses will take some time, and maybe that can increase the complexity, or maybe sometimes if it is a very much personalized data, that people will hesitate to answer you. In this case, it is having the focus on your study, therefore fulfilling the primary purpose is solved, that okay, it is the intended purpose, that I need this information and then I will collect this information for my study. The primary data may be used as secondary data by other researchers. So this is again some kind of overlapping, that suppose I collect my information and then I wish that okay, this data the other researcher can also use to interpret in a different way. It is not like the same research that other will work, but it is open, that I have collected information, it is available on the site. So to me it is primary survey, because I have done the survey, I have collected, I have collated and I have reported the raw data, not the processed and the results, is the raw data collected and it is available for other researcher to use. So for them it will be the secondary, like that it will go on. Coming to the example of primary sources, in this case definitely the survey and the questionnaires, these are some of the you can say technique by which you can do it. So what is the difference between survey and questionnaire? So definitely the survey may be questionnaire less. How it is? Like maybe this is some sort of observation survey, and maybe on a particular traffic stream or maybe on a road, you just capture the video and try to assess the average speed of any vehicle approaching to an intersection, or maybe something like you also want to identify that okay, how many public transport, how many two wheelers, how many four wheelers they are actually using that particular stretch of the road. So for that there are different system. You can go with the some sort of tally system, or maybe you can tally system means there you just make a count and then you can see the number. So maybe you have to write that this is car, this is two wheeler. In a traffic and transportation survey we used to do it for that. You can also count, maybe some cases you want to do the similar survey in a tourist spot where we want to capture that okay, what is the footfall. Then you can, if you can distinguish that okay, male female or maybe different age group, you can apply this kind of tally system and we make the count. So in such cases you don't need to make a questionnaire where there will be questions and then you expect the respondent to answer. So that is the survey. So like that you can go for a speed survey, you can go for a vehicle count survey, which also we call the total vehicle count and all, and the questionnaire. It may be stakeholder interview. So where again you can just go for a qualitative approach in terms of like taking interview, unstructured interview or the structured interview, where you have some kind of few broad question in your mind and then you interact with the stakeholder and try to get extract out of it. Okay, so that is something you can say the interview. The field observation, like where you can also have some sort of assessment, where it is not like a perception survey and it is not exactly like you can say that only through the videography that you are going. So in the observation you can assess the road condition. There may be a checklist where you can note it down, or maybe you can measure something like okay, this is the available width of the sidewalk or the road, or maybe this is something the color of the building facade. So it depending on the need you can have some field observation, which is not of like taking survey of people or maybe the questionnaire survey. The other one is that neither of them, it's the experiment. So you make a experimental setup and then through say simulation, through some observation, you can just come up with the information. So in such cases like it may be a like exactly testing of a material kind of experiment, or it may be the experiment where it is running through some sort of algorithm, or maybe in such cases it is something computational experiment. So in both the cases, like it is like you give some input, and with the process and the algorithm that you fit into that program, it will give you some sort of output. So these are broad few ways that help you to collect the primary information. Now next thing is that which source of data to use. So it is something we should go for primary survey, or should we go for secondary survey, or we don't need to do any such kind of survey, we can just rely on certain sort of assumption. So it is something it's not very easy to give one answer for this, because depending on the need you have to go for the collection of information. So for that you have to first understand the data requirements, what specific data is required. So if you require the land use changes, the land cover changes in a particular area, for such case you don't require to go to the site and then collect the information, the changes and all, because in such cases you cannot even do that, because at this moment the present situation, but how do you assess the past one? So for that you have to rely on the temporal images of that particular location. So suppose if some of the satellite images which was captured like so 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you can compare it and then you can see the changes and then you can quantify. So you have to rely on that. But suppose if you want to understand the change in their socio-economic, you know, status, or maybe the employment uh, percentage status, or all such kind of status. So for that, for the current date, you have to go for some sort of primary survey. But for the past, how do you assess that what was there before? You can still ask that question to respondent, but if you have some already published document of those kind of information, what was their status 5 years ago and all, so you can take that as a comparison, or you can take that as a secondary information and you do some primary survey and then try to compare. So in that case you require both primary and secondary, wherever you try to compare some before after and changes, those kind of thing, right? But where you want to do some kind of study where you want to project the future based on present, so more likely you have to go for a primary survey. Then it will also like depend on allocate the unit of analysis, that what kind of information you require, whether it is at the household level you require, whether it is at the neighborhood level or the city level. So depending on the purpose, you need to understand that what type of information you require. Identify the scale of the study. So one is that what information you require and then where you are going to apply it, at neighborhood level, city level, district level, regional level, or the country level, across different country. So it all depends on the requirement. You have to pick up the sources. Say for example, if you want to do a comparison of certain aspect across globe, and then for that probably the sources that you need to search, maybe it is a different sources web. All informations may not be available with a particular single source, so then you have to depend on other sources as well. Say again giving one example on that, during COVID time there were papers coming up which is demonstrating multiple country information. Even you will find certain review paper where it compare the information of different country, or maybe in some cases the quantitative study had been performed based on the information of different countries. So for that those kind of information either being supplied by the co-authors who like belong to different countries, or maybe it is available somewhere from the secondary sources, or maybe the primary data collection are done in different cities or different countries, and then that is being compiled. So that we need to understand. Then other information which you also cannot neglect, the estimate the budget and time. Many a times if you have more budget, you can increase the sample size, because then the probability of getting the representativeness will be little better, because then you can do some sort of better segment wise analysis. But if you have very limited budget, then many a times researcher they are trying to at least fulfill the minimum requirement and then not extend it. Suppose if by that particular formula that we have discussed the other day, you require around 384 sample for infinite population, and it is almost like this 384 is the minimum sample size. Then always there is some kind of tendency that one will just go for say 384 and then maybe 400, that's all. But if you have the budget and time, maybe you can extend it to a higher side. In that case you will have flexibility to even go for cross classification and do some more analysis on that. Because if with the minimum sample size, if you want to segregate into the income wise sample, so probably you will end up with some of the strata, or maybe some income group you don't have adequate sample to make a judgment that this age group is saying this. So like that you have to increase the sample on that, and maybe in that case you have to go for a stratification and stratified random sampling that we just discussed in our previous lecture. So like that it will all depend on that aspect. Now let us understand when to go for primary survey or primary data collection. if you have the information available and which can solve our purpose of the research, unnecessarily we don't need to go for primary survey. So the first question is that, is required data for your research available from the secondary sources like all the census data, government reports, past research, other valid documents? If answer is no, then you have to collect the primary information. So it may be either of this. Say data is available but not at my desired level. What level data is not available? So I have to do that. Maybe the census data, they are not capturing certain sort of information which is required for my study. I have to then go for it. If yes, next question, is available secondary data applicable to your unit? That's why I am just mentioning that okay, data is available but that is at district level but not at the particular neighborhood level, or maybe at the household level we don't have information, but for my research it actually requires that household level data. So in such case also, if the answer is no, then you have to go for primary data collection. If answer is yes, next, is data available for that study, is maintaining the scale. So here we have discussed about these 2 points, right. One is the unit of analysis where we are going to do the comparison and make certain kind of assessment, and the other is the scale as well, at what level we are doing. So if here also the answer is no, then we have to go for the primary data collection. So it is something like you can get this answer very easily about looking at the secondary sources. So my advice, once you finalize your research objective and where you also finalize the type of information that you require to assess to achieve your objective, look at the available sources and then check all these points, whether the data is reliable, whether data is complete, whether the data is having that timeliness, it is not outdated. Then you look at that what particular level that data is available, whether that will solve your purpose or not. Say population data is available, but we don't have the mode share data. The population information is available, but what mode they are using for their trip, maybe if that is not available. So for that purpose there is no other way to rely on the primary data collection, unless otherwise the same information which is being uploaded by other researcher which they found. But in that process also there will be other ambiguity that probably you need to look into. If you want to have certain kind of randomness data collection, and the past researcher has done some convenience sampling, so maybe you will have conflict. So it is not very easy that even if a data set is available, whether you can use it. If in that particular data set one of the information is missing, but you need that data along with all other information which is available, so in that case also you cannot rely on that data, because for only that extra data, extra information that you require, you will not really go for a separate survey for that one particular information collection. So then it is better to go for the entire data collection. So it always depends on the need and the purpose that we need to determine. Now the constraint of all this, one is definitely the budget. Does the budget of the study enable the purchase of secondary data and a survey of, or you just go for surveying the household? So it all depends on whether like some of the information available, but as I said that it is not publicly available free of cost. You have to procure the data, you have to purchase the data, and many a times, like if we consider about the satellite image data and all, they are very costly. Even some organization nowadays they are doing some kind of survey and that data is sellable. So for such kind of cases there are few points. One is the cost of that particular data. Second, also the belief in that data, that whether that they have collected the data in a right manner or not. So in all such cases, like budget can play a crucial role. At the same time, the budget will play a crucial role in determining whether you will go for your primary data collection, that how much information is required, and then accordingly you take a call. Similar, the time, budget and time, they are two important aspects. Does available time for the study allow the collection of primary data? So, in that case, if you say that I do not have much time, so maybe in my case and the nature of research that I am doing, mostly it will rely on the secondary information. Primary data is not that essential. Maybe if we add, that can add certain value, but it is not mandatory. In such cases, you look at the time and also the cost. If it is okay that okay with the existing information you can bring out certain kind of findings that you intend to do, so probably in that case will not go for the primary data collection. So, purchase of secondary data is again a concern, and then we have to look at the budget whether it is there or not. Now, data sources in urban planning. So, in that case, like definitely the development plan preparation in Indian cities requires the data collection, both primary and secondary sources. The data is then analyzed, that collected information, to understand the existing situation and propose the development alternatives, to identify the gap and other part as well. For example, population data is collected from census of India, while household consumption, expenditure data, these are calculated from the primary survey, to know that okay what is their expenditure, what are the infrastructure they have. To assess the infrastructure you need that information as well. In preparing of development plan, census of government data is used for analyzing the metropolitan growth trend. So, it is again a secondary information, but we see that okay if you have some time series data, different population in different census year, then based on that we can go for particular population projection. Okay, there are different way that we can do the projection. The municipal administration data has been collected to estimate the infrastructure services and demand. So, in this case also like secondary information can be used. As at the same time you have a sample survey to understand the consumer satisfaction with infrastructure service, where it is not being captured in the government report that okay this infrastructures are made and what is the satisfaction of users towards that infrastructure. So, for that we need to go for primary data collection. So, this way whether you will find that okay some of the infrastructure people are not satisfied with, or there are certain gaps which need to be improved, that you can make a proposal in the development plan. So, for that we actually in this case we use both secondary information and as well as the primary data collection into consideration. In this case, for example, that this is from Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority master plan. They have given the population, and then you can see that okay, so they have used certain information about the census 1971, 81, 91, 2001, and those are already available information. So, they use in their table and also the growth. So, in such cases they also calculated the gross density in hectare, the population in that particular square kilometer. At the same time, now this is some extract of the detailed project report of Chennai Metro Rail project. So, here it says the baseline data have been collected from secondary sources such as census and statistical handbook, and primary data are being collected through household survey. So, for this particular DPR, like to assess the infrastructure, or maybe in that all this metro DPR, they also go for some sort of assessment of rehabilitation part. Okay, that people like if in that alignment there is some kind of issue. So, all such kind of cases, like some information they want to take it from this. Even for the comprehensive mobility plan, in a typical transportation forecasting modeling. So, in such cases, like there are certain options, like you would like to understand the future mode share, like whether like if you introduce the metro in that city, whether people will be willing to use it, or willing to shift from existing mode to that. So in such cases we will go for certain standard primary survey to understand the people's willingness. So in such cases those informations are not really readily available in the government website and different databases. So we have to go for primary survey. So main point in this case is that the primary data is collected by the researcher from the respondent if it is required, and secondary data may be not useful in terms of like my research is not based on that, or maybe the data available is not adequate, it is not consistent enough, it is also having certain kind of error. So in that case we go for it. Secondary data is collected from the previously collected data by the different agency. There is a need to understand the data requirement, scale of that particular data and unit of analysis to understand what exact data we require and accordingly we plan. Time and financial constraint definitely will determine the selection of information, and definitely based on the information you do the analysis, and there will be some kind of dependence, and in that case you have to also add the limitation in your research that okay, this is based on this and probably data is not available. So whatever the analysis you will perform, there is certain sort of assumptions. So to summarize, here we understood that different sources of data, what is primary, what is secondary, then also the secondary sources of information where from we can get it from different sources, and then primary data, there are different means of doing the data collection and then getting the primary survey. And again it all depends on the time, cost, the purpose, that is much more important rather than time and cost, the purpose of that particular data. So if your, again in short, if your research demands the information which are already available and is found to be authentic, accurate, matching the scale of information or the application area, the unit of analysis, then probably you can easily go with that secondary data. But if it is not, then you have to go for primary data collection, which will definitely take little more time and cost. But if your research demands for such information to bring some useful findings for strategy making and all, especially the topic in planning and architecture, so you must go for primary data collection. So with that we conclude here. These are few references, and then with that we'll have our next lecture, lecture number 25, that is on preparation of survey questionnaire. I'll give you a basic idea about it because definitely the questionnaire will differ based on the research type, the topic and all. It cannot be generalized in that way, but few tips and tricks in the questionnaire which normally are very useful, and we found it very effective in terms of making the respondent understand about the survey, and you can get the information in a effective way. So with that, thank you once again for joining the course. We'll be meeting you soon with the next lecture.